right, welcome to another edition of Signifyd's Crimes and Cocktails series. I love hosting these. I love, talking with our merchants and our partners, and with some other experts from Signifyd. And today we're going to talk about tackling account takeovers, and all of the types of fraud that goes along with that. As well as some really interesting data that we saw from the Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and Q4 so far for 2023. A little bit of a preview of where we think things might go, and then per usual, we'll have our cocktails, to go along with the stories. So, really excited to have everybody here. If you haven't joined before, we're going to do a series of polls. Please do participate. The data is really interesting for the attendees, and then for other folks that can kind of see this in terms of how things are going in our space. And then we'll also be sharing some information. You can, of course, feel free to screenshot if you want, but this is being recorded. It'll be available. If you want to have a private read through, we'll talk about how we can do that as well. So welcome. And given that we only have about 50 minutes, let's go ahead and get started. So kicking off with a poll, would really love for you all to kind of talk a little bit about how you would rate the Cyber 5 performance. So Cyber 5 is Black Friday to Cyber Monday, those types of like big holiday blockbuster deals. Maybe pre-COVID, we saw that a little bit more than we had during COVID. We saw a little bit of a return to those kind of crazy times. Would be very curious if you all did better, about the same, or worse than you expected for those peak periods during the holidays. And are great. I see people are already using the polls, so that's excellent. And some really good answer rates. And so we'll keep that poll up and come back to the results here in a minute or two. But for those of you who haven't met, I am Bennett. I'm the Chief Customer Officer at Signifyd. Behind me is sunny San Jose, and so I'm actually in our world headquarters. So really excited to chat with you today. And I've brought along with me Eleanor.
Perfect. Thanks, Bennett. So nice to meet you all. My name is Eleanor. I am based in cold, frigid Denver these days. I'm a product manager here at Signifyd, working on building account protection and account takeover solutions for our merchants.
All right. So we'll kind of show our homework first in terms of our Cyber 5 recap, and then we'll kind of talk about the poll. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the basics of account takeovers. What does it mean, and the different types of account takeovers and how that can result in losses and in distrust with merchants and their customers and their users. And then we'll share some very concrete examples, social engineering ones, very basic ones, hopefully that will kind of prime the ability for you to kind of think about, hey, is ATO or account takeover, is that a problem? Is account integrity a problem for me? What can I do about it? And kind of what are other people seeing and what are they facing from that? We'll, of course, end with kind of best practices and what can we do to help prevent some of those account integrity issues. So in terms of showing our homework, let's give a Cyber 5 recap. And so what we saw during the Cyber 5 was that we kind of expected October and a pull forward to be really aggressive for consumers. You saw Prime Day, you saw people trying to piggyback on Prime Day. We didn't see a whole lot of success across our network with that, and October was kind of muted. And so you see the 4% growth of year over year for October, which is pretty much in line with inflation, maybe slightly ahead. But what we actually saw during the Cyber 5 was nearly double the growth that we expected. And so we, within our network, we saw consumers really come out and spend a lot based on that. And so then in terms of where that means that we'll end up overall, we are actually a little bit higher than we thought we might be, headed into December. So if we share the results from the poll, I'll go ahead and pull that up now. You should be able to see the results, I believe. And so pretty much half of folks saw that the results were about as they expected, with maybe a third saying that it was better and maybe 20% doing worse than they expected. So on balance, that might work out to be about kind of what we saw in our network. Many people did quite well compared to what we were expecting during Black Friday, Cyber Monday. We'll share some of what we saw work during that time period in terms of driving that. But Eleanor, any comments from what we're seeing from the poll or thoughts there?
Yeah, I think all in all, what we're saying is maybe Amazon isn't as scary as we need to have Amazon be, and people will shop with you during those Prime shopping days. We don't necessarily need to be chasing Prime Day or things like that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good call out. Consumers seem to say, cool, you're offering a discount. I'll take advantage of it. I don't
Exactly.
really care when it is. So with that in mind, here's some of the specifics. Again, love to share this data, and we'll talk a little bit later if you want to have a private briefing compared to kind of your results. But we really saw a return to normal. I feel a little bit vindicated. I've been saying to the media for a while, hey, I think we might return to where Black Friday, Cyber Monday is the most important part of the retail year again, which was kind of 2018 and before, very true for about a decade. And so what we're seeing is maybe a return to post-COVID normal from that perspective in terms of when consumers are willing to open up their pocketbooks. They want to buy things. They want to buy things that are deals. And gosh, they found them. And so from our perspective, the AOV went up and the order count went up. And this is despite huge discounts and promo codes. So overall, if we take a look at the promo code use, I think that's really interesting because the promo code use is up again year over year pretty massively. So the yellow line here is the percentage of carts that had a promo that was applied, and then also compared to last year, which is the magenta line. So you can see then the year over year kind of change, the magnitude there. And what we saw was almost a 40% increase with a promo code being applied, and that the actual discounts were higher than last year. So not only were there more carts with promos, there were also deeper discounts, and that's what was moving. So really very promotion driven, very value driven, which again is aligned with kind of what we thought would happen with the consumers. It's the consumers, sometimes they'll tell you something and they'll do something else. They very much told us in all of our surveys, we are looking for value. We are trying to stretch our dollar. If we find something that we perceive to be valuable, we'll splurge for it. But if it's not perceived to be value, I'm not going to do it. Luxury and et cetera saw some issues there, and we'll talk about that in a second. So the other thing that people did is they kind of traded down. And so the trading down as a concept means maybe you don't buy, if you're looking for, AirPods, maybe you don't buy the latest generation of AirPods, but you buy one generation back. Or if you're in groceries, maybe you don't buy the whole gallon of organic milk, but you just buy whole gallon of milk or half a gallon of organic milk. So similar products, same category, but instead of buying top of the line, you go for one step down from whatever that consumer would have done in the past. And so what that means is we saw the actual price of what consumers paid was actually down year over year, 8% down for a SKU, which is pretty big difference compared to the inflation story that we've been hearing, for the past, call it 12, 15 months. And so the cart size, however, got bigger. And so what people did is they felt like they were getting more value, right? They got more things at a lower per item price, ultimately spending about the same or more. And so that the people that were able to do that promo activity profitably really had a really good holiday season so far. All right. Kind of going along with that, we have grocery and household, general beauty and cosmetics had really good year over year. Luxury in terms of their performance actually kind of held their own in terms of that. And what we saw was, electronics had a pretty disappointing year over year comps, and collectibles or kind of, tchotchkes, high end cards and toys and our gold and all those other types of items were down pretty precipitously this year compared year over year. And so I think this is interesting, hopefully for folks to kind of see in general, kind of across the board in almost every category, we saw kind of healthy growth with some other categories kind of dragging down that average. One other thing that we, of course, pay a lot of attention to at Signifyd, we offer a financial guarantee against fraudulent behavior, against ATO and against financial crime, is we saw a really marked decrease in fraud pressure during November. So October actually kind of in the ramp up to the holiday season, we saw an increase year over year in fraud pressure. But last year, there was a massive scaled attack on U.S. merchants, and we did not see a similar kind of broad-based attack this year. And so overall, thus far in the holiday season, we've seen kind of an averaging out to about 1% increase. But really, during those prime shopping days, we saw a lot of really, really good behavior within our network and very few sophisticated fraud rings kind of doing broad-based attacks. So in general, we've seen fraud pressure down year over year. And so it's nice to see that the holiday season maybe, again, has kind of returned to maybe this new normal from that perspective. All right. We're going to talk about gift cards and ATO and how those types of near currency and kind of loyalty and alternative currencies, all those types of programs kind of tie together in this concept of loyalty and this concept of building brand identity. If you're trying to win only on value and your only way to deliver value is through discounts, it's very hard to have a profitable business. And so all of the merchants that I'm talking to are thinking about, how do I build a better relationship with my consumer? How do I give them value that's not just price driven? How do I give them value that's around experiences, about points? There's so many ways to do this, but offering kind of a way to be able to gift without actually having to provide the gift, offering a way to provide that kind of value, all these digital based kind of currencies, whether it's points or gift cards or whatever, are rife for account takeover attacks. And so that's probably why we've kind of mushed these topics together, because they're really inherently very similar. If we think about gift cards, they are just incredibly fast rising share of e-commerce traffic in terms of volume. And what we've seen is this is year over year growth. And what we've seen is that retailers are experiencing more growth online than offline. And so if you think about retail growing at, call it 2 to 4%, e-commerce is growing at 4 to 8%, and then gift cards are growing at, call it double that again. This is a really large share of very profitable growth for a lot of retailers. And I work with a lot of people that are thinking about launching gift cards or are thinking about bringing their own gift card network in-house from that perspective, because they're seeing this relatively small part of their business really have excellent growth when maybe the rest of their business is not doing, certainly not 18% growth year over year. So people are trying to really dive into that. All right. And so when we combine these pieces, we see that the way that people are purchasing these is that it's both really driven by both count and amount. And so really it's not like, ooh, like bigger gift cards and et cetera, but I think consumers like these. And we're going to talk a little, well, I know consumers like these. We're going to talk about which types of consumers like these and kind of why. And Eleanor is going to talk a little bit about kind of why the fraudsters are targeting gift cards. I want to focus on the consumer though first, about why do people like gift cards? Well, it's the closest thing to saying, hey, I thought of you. This gift card to this place is going to provide you with, I know enough about you to know that this is where you want to spend the money. It's instant, right, from that perspective. So you can buy it on December 20th and still have it delivered plenty of time for a holiday gift giving. And people who are Gen Z and below absolutely love gift cards from that perspective. They want to be able to use them. And so it's kind of the nice way of saying, well, just give me cash. right? And it's that seems to be this as a socially acceptable middle ground that everybody can kind of agree is this is the way that we can provide a gift while still being thoughtful, and the convenience is just off the charts. And so that's why all the consumers, every single consumer survey that we see, their propensity to want and to use digital gift cards goes up generation by generation from that perspective. So we only expect these trends to continue. For those same reasons, we see fraudsters want to try to take away from that. And what we've actually seen is pretty intense fluctuations in terms of attempts of criminal fraud and friendly fraud. We'll talk about the different types of ways that people steal gift cards. The other thing about gift cards is they're pretty close to cash. So Eleanor, you maybe want to talk a little bit about why we see such wild fluctuations in fraud pressure. Why do fraudsters want gift cards?
Yeah, so you've heard it. Fraudsters love gift cards for the same reason your customers like gift cards. It is cash, basically. And one thing I think that's really interesting about gift card transactions in particular is when someone's buying something with a gift card, it's pretty much irreversible. There's not the same recourse you have, obviously, if someone's buying something with stolen financials for physical goods. And when we're talking about things like digital delivery, it is pretty much anonymous for the most part. It's really easy to buy this thing, get access to it, and then use it before you even have any idea who this person is. So all in all, what that means is gift cards are this really highly appealing question or highly appealing vector for fraudsters to use. I think another kind of layer on this is it's not just about converting that gift card on your site necessarily anymore. What we're seeing is that fraudsters are flipping gift cards because they can get almost that whole value for them. So not only now are we just holding on to a cash equivalent, they're getting literal cash on the secondary marketplace. So it becomes a very appealing way to get money quickly. So how are people buying these gift cards? How are they getting through it? The most, I would say, vanilla is we see people just buying gift cards with stolen financials that they know work. Like we said, they're masked from who they are because the only thing you really have about them is potentially a billing address and then a masked email address. So pretty common there. As people are getting more sophisticated, though, we're starting to see fraudsters doing things like attacking accounts, logging into these accounts that have saved legitimate credit cards on them, and then use that account to buy gift cards. So it looks just like a normal good customer of yours using a credit card that they may have used several times on your website, very unsuspicious, which buying gift cards that are then going to someone. So you might imagine during off season, that behavior looks pretty suspicious, but during the holiday, it wouldn't be uncommon to see an account placing multiple orders for gift cards in quick succession. So very appealing. And then one thing I think is interesting as we think about gift cards and the evolution of them is it can become a very important part of your loyalty strategy, where as someone kind of buys from you, maybe that goes into a point system where you can convert it into a gift card. So fraudsters learn this. They then log into these accounts that have all of these accrued points in them, really quickly then convert those to gift cards and buy the product. So that is something that's really interesting is like they don't even have to bother with finding a credit card in that situation. All they have to do is log into an account and then convert that and seal those. And that obviously bypasses a lot of any traditional checks that are going to be in place. And it's something that the account holder themselves is never even going to notice necessarily because there's not a charge associated with that. So it's another area where we're starting to see a lot more pressure around all of this. And I think when you think about gift cards altogether, it's just another step that's removing the fraudster from that initial stolen financials purchase. So it's just another thing that we have to unwind as these fraudsters are getting sophisticated. They're making these daisy chains of activities to, again, do everything they can to mask their identity and get goods as quickly as possible. So moving on from gift cards a little bit, we kind of want to talk about account takeover, which is one of the areas that is very popular in gift cards, obviously. So I think is kind of our first thing I want everyone to think about. Off the top of your head, just like the very top of your head, how many online accounts do you think you have?
I expect this is like the surveys for how fast you drive, and everyone faster who drives faster than you is dangerous, and everyone who drives slower than you is dangerous. I'm very curious if our data matches with what the poll says.
Yeah.
And it is
Uh,
not going to match. I can see
we'll see.
already.
The other thing I was like, oh, I could be really mean and ask everyone how many passwords they reuse, but I'm not here to shame. I'm
Right,
not here to
right.
shame.
How many fewer passwords do you have than accounts that you have? Yeah, that's a good one.
Yes, we should do like a ratio or something
Yeah.
like that. Cool, I'll give that a couple more seconds. Okay, great. Let's go ahead and share those poll results. Um, yes, kind of as we suspected, what we have seen is that the average consumer has 150 online accounts, and that's the average consumer. So all of us, for the most part, very vastly underestimate this number because, as you might imagine, the number that we're probably thinking about and responding to in this poll is the number of accounts we're actually using. But consumers have so many accounts that they just don't remember that they have. They signed up for a free promo like for the first time they were buying on someone's website eons ago, and that has since been long forgotten. So there's a lot of information out there on a lot of different places, obviously, that you aren't paying attention to. And then I didn't want to shame anyone, but it's exceedingly common for people to reuse passwords. It's about 65% of consumers admit to using multiple passwords. So that real number is probably much, much higher if this is self-reported data, obviously. So what these two things mean in conjunction is that your particular business is now only as secure as all of the other retailers that your customers shop at. So it just takes one person in that Venn diagram of merchants to be compromised for that information to get out there that's likely been forgotten about, that's likely been repeated. So now fraudsters can go throughout the whole network of the internet pretty much and try to use these credentials to gain access to your site. And obviously, we heard it all during the pandemic repeatedly. More and more people were shopping online. So that led to an exacerbation of this problem. So generally, what we've seen is in the past year, ATO attacks have increased 71% year over year in North America. And what that all in all adds up to is more than 1 in 5 consumers have been an ATO victim. And I guarantee you, most of them don't know about that because again, it's accounts we've had open for years and years and years that we've completely forgotten about. And maybe the person is logging in just to get access to more information. They might not even necessarily be logging in to make a fraudulent purchase on your website.
In preparation for this webinar, I actually bought some things from a retailer that I had gotten a long time ago and looked to see if I had my password saved and how many other passwords it had been. I know about all this stuff, and I still had a shared password from 4 years ago.
Yep.
And it actually I shipped stuff to my address from 4 years ago. I've since bought a house, remodeled the house, moved everything, and then I had to contact the retailer to get it changed. And this is my job. So imagine if that's what I do, what your average consumer does and how well they safeguard or don't safeguard those accounts.
Exactly. Yes. There's a lot of stuff in there that just sits. And when you set it, sometimes it gets forgotten. So all in all, ATO is a super complex issue, and there are many layers that our merchants need to think about as they're thinking about account protection and ATO. So I think one really interesting stat is that in 2021, we saw 33% of all login attempts were malicious. So that's something where it's a hugely popular vector where we see people really, really hitting these sites hard to try to get in. So some of the stuff that you'll see at the time of account login, you see fraudsters coming to you with credentials that were clearly stolen off another site, and they'll try to guess until they match on your site to see that that was uncovered. And they already have a starting point there. So it's pretty easy for them to get in. And then we're going to talk about situations where it's a phishing or a malware situation where the consumer is unwittingly already giving them legitimate information. Well, fraudsters, you have to go do work to find a data breach or something like that. You get tricked into giving this. So then that account gets taken over. They're betting on this recycled password situation. They're betting on these aged account situations to go throughout the ecosystem. I think one thing that's really interesting is you have brute force attacks here. Like, you wouldn't think that brute force attacks still happened in the case of like people have bots, stuff leaks all the time. Like, you shouldn't have to do this random guessing, but we do see fraudsters still doing that to get into these accounts. So it sounds like it should be more sophisticated, but the systems do still allow this, and obviously it works because they're still doing it. One thing that I think is really interesting about this account layer, as we're talking about it within the account protection scheme, is card testing is something that is very, very coupled with ATO. So fraudsters will sometimes log into an account that has been ATO'd. Maybe they'll even make their own account. And many merchants today allow for saved credit cards because obviously consumers love it. You love it. It makes it really easy to convert down the line. But what essentially that gives fraudsters is a free way to test the validity of those stolen financials. Because if you think about it, when you're saving a card to a wallet, it's either a $0 auth or a $1 auth. So you're giving them information for free to come into your website as a testing destination to figure out if their card is legitimate or not. So even if they maybe don't end up converting on your site, they still come to you to get that information, and you're giving them that feedback loop potentially. I think one also interesting thing I have seen in gift cards in particular here, kind of tying it back to what we're talking about, is depending on who your gift card network is or things like that, fraudsters will figure out like the code structures, and then they'll go into accounts that allow those codes to be saved to the account and just start recycling through them to see what cards are out there that have value. So it is, again, just a really easy way for the fraudsters to get a lot of data for relatively little cost, because we're not necessarily forcing them into a transaction there. That being said, though, ATO is one of the biggest fraud pressures we see at checkout. It was 29% of merchants report ATO as the biggest contributor to their fraud pressure. So we do things upstream, but we're still going to have that pressure downstream. So what does this actually look like? We talked about gift card ATO. So don't need to, continue to beat the dead horse on that one. Moving into a different kind of horse. We have a lot of Trojan horse ATO as well, where fraudsters are logging into aged accounts that look good on your website. They put in their stolen financials from somewhere else. They change that delivery address, all things that probably look normal when we're talking about an aged account that someone's reaccessing. But then they use that to make a fraudulent purchase. So they get in based on the good graces of that account to get those goods for themselves. And then synthetic accounts is, I think, one of the most interesting things that we've seen. I call this the long con of account takeover fraud. So fraudster comes in, maybe they'll take over an aged account and start placing some low risk purchases to rebuild that history, start making it look like an active account again. Maybe they're even starting from scratch completely on a new account and doing the same thing. Where they're doing this, they're making themselves look behaviorally like a good customer. And then they're going to come in with that stolen card and a new delivery address to start making the really big purchases. So they're very clever about what they're doing. And synthetic accounts are so interesting because on the face of it, they look like a good customer, and they're probably shipping stuff like that they would actually buy. So it's not necessarily like they're coming in and placing fraudulent orders right away. They're really taking advantage of what loyalty and other programs drive on that. So we spent some time talking about ATO. I think we are now ready to share some stories that we have from our network. But I think, Bennett, let's get that first poll question up for people. Now that we've been a little doom and gloom, how confident do you in our audience feel about your account security strategy?
And this is from the point of view of you as a merchant.
Yes.
for your users.
Yes. I think I don't feel it as a consumer.
Right.
Like I have a strategy for account security, obviously, because I would not worry about this as my average consumer self
Right.
necessarily.
Think as people are coming in, it's like, yeah, middle of the road, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
Probably some sampling bias of folks that want to attend this webinar.
Yes, for sure.
I'll note that we did have a question from earlier in of where does sporting goods fit into our segments in terms of industry, and that definitely fits into leisure and outdoor as a category. And it's worth noting, so we didn't really introduce Signifyd or kind of where the data is coming from, but while people are still answering this poll question, we work with some of the largest retailers and marketplaces in the world, like eBay and Walmart, and then all the way down to mom and pops on Shopify. And we basically our segment level data is based on SKUs as well. So it's not like, this merchant sells this mainly, so they're in this category. We also look at it by what the actual item itself is. So we can help kind of see trends across the entirety of what the consumer is doing. All right. And then if we that poll, I think is probably going to end up about in the same place where it's like 75% are like meh. I feel kind of okay about account security. And only about 18% feel like they've got the accounts under control, which I think is, it's a pretty low number, I think, in terms of what maybe we would want and what a consumer would want, right? Obviously. So
Absolutely. Great. Super interesting. I am glad to hear that all of you, for the most part, are at least thinking about your account strategy. So you are ahead of the game there in many ways. Cool. So moving into our first story, this is the story that we like to call first order account takeover. So this is using a trusted account to sneak through, basically a pretty traditional, let's call it ATO story with some interesting stuff. So we talked about Trojan horse fraud earlier. This is a pretty classic example of that. And this was interesting to me because it was a situation where the fraudster found some stolen stuff on the internet, probably found where that person worked, guessed the company email format, and then was able to access that person's corporate account on that website. So the fraudster accesses the account pretty quickly with pretty little effort when you think about it, all things considered. And then they start placing orders pretty quickly with stolen financials. Naturally, most people aren't super monitoring the velocity of these employee accounts because it would be pretty brazen for an employee to be defrauding their own company using their company account. So they have a sort of trusted status within the company. They started seeing these orders come in and they had some interesting patterns that Signifyd identified and stopped for them. So some of the risk signals that we saw here was this particular employee was based in Korea. All of a sudden, they were placing BOPIS orders for New York City. Maybe not out of the realm of possibility, but definitely something a little bit strange. When we really then started to dig into it, the fraudster was using this account, but they were changing the confirmation email for that particular order. So the fraudster was able to then go to this completely unrelated store in New York and say, like, here's my confirmation email that I received directly from this particular merchant. Give me my product. So that was something where it looks completely legitimate to the store person as well. Again, this is an aged account where there's a lot of really good history built up there. So it's not something you necessarily be suspicious of. And all of this is a super trusted account. So why would we necessarily come into this with suspicion here? So what it ended up being in the end is we saw it was 14 accounts were compromised across all of this, and it was 7 different confirmation emails, all doing the same BOPIS in New York situation. So we were obviously able to shut down this particular fraud vector very quickly, and then also have worked with the merchant to kind of beef up how we're going to monitor employee accounts, knowing that we can't just assume that they're going to be trusted accounts, they have become a very appealing fraud vector for those merchants or for those fraudsters.
When I talk with merchants, they typically will say some variation of, well, we've created a walled garden around our accounts. Like we've got so and so monitoring bots, we've got so and so monitoring this, we've got so and so monitoring this, and we validated it all. The problem with creating a trusted data set is that it then creates a honeypot. And so then it becomes very interesting for a fraudster to break into that walled garden and then be treated as a kind of trusted actor. And so I think that that's something that is very hard to kind of wrap your head around of, well, can't I just protect something at one point, right? The door. And unfortunately, that's not the way that kind of e-commerce and payments has really kind of shaken out. So we'll talk a little bit about our vision of how you have to look at things holistically. And so in this particular case, you have to have, data elements that might not be available at the time of login, right? You don't know what they're going to try to buy when they're trying to log in. So it's really impossible to tell the intention of that particular user when they're logging in.
Exactly. And then I think we have our next question.
All right. This is framed in such a way that we might be leading you. But I'm very curious if someone does answer, have you, a friend, or a family member experienced a phishing attempt? This is actually a pretty fun icebreaker. Like what's the closest you've been to being phished? Oh, and as soon as I said it, we got some contrarians with a no. I love it. Maybe just one though. This is more of a primer of, this activity is ubiquitous, right? Scammer calls, emails, hey, I get notes from, our co-founder, right? Of course, which is of course not from him, right? And those types of things. And so I think that this is a very common thing. Vast majority of people, even here, 94% of people are saying, yes, I definitely have experienced a phishing attempt. I think what's really interesting about these is how dismissive we are of these phishing attempts and how normal it is to receive a scam call and just kind of ignore it, delete, and report, and all of those types of things. Even on an iPhone, which is a very secure kind of device. And the story that I'm going to tell is going to be a little bit different, hopefully, to kind of show you the level of sophistication that fraudsters are willing to go to in order to be able to socially engineer in what we call kind of like a second order ATO attack. And so, in many ways, we call this kind of victim assisted fraud. And so, what that means is that the actual human being whose account it is, or the actual human being whose maybe even payment information it is involved in the transaction somehow. And this comes in lots of different flavors, but I do want to really paint the people who have their account taken over with some sympathy, right? Because ultimately they're your consumers, they're your customers, they're your users. And I think it's actually really powerful to sit in their shoes and see how confusing it is and how scary it is to not know who you're dealing with and to believe that you're being helped when actually you're not. From that perspective, I find these stories to be very emotionally compelling. So some of the things that I'm going to talk about, some characteristics that are more broad based, is victim assisted fraud. They typically target elderly folks. There's some element of social engineering where the fraudster is presenting as an expert. They're usually there to help kind of solve a problem, oftentimes even a problem that the fraudster has fabricated itself. And then they exploit personal and payment information. So, honestly, this is a pretty broad-based definition. But you can see how this type of, hey, find someone who needs some help, be the help that they need, develop trust, and then exploit that trust. And so in many ways, this is probably more emotionally damaging than a ransomware attack. There you have someone who kind of gets in and then is immediately very upfront, give me this for that or else this will happen. Here we have people who are being tricked into providing some level of assistance with their accounts while maybe even on the phone with the person who's committing the crime. So I've pulled some screens of kind of how this works. And so maybe you see that someone is looking for how to get an Amazon Prime Video subscription from that perspective and that kind of information. The fraud ring might actually buy an ad associated with that or place an ad associated with kind of this type of information and say and look very compelling. It's maybe everyone here sees, hey, there's an advertisement and it's an ad, and we might not click on that. People do click on this, and it's a chat with an expert online now. It's very hard for some folks to be able to parse what is part of the material, what is not part of the material, and then be taken into somewhere that is very tailored towards a particular outcome. So I'm an elderly person and looking for a way to get my Amazon Prime hooked up. I click on this just chat with an expert over here on the right. Or perhaps I search for something and then that's another ad here. Hey, Amazon device support is here. Chat with an Amazon tech. Look at with excellent ratings. In general, the UI here is pretty compelling, right? It looks like it's a support chat app that you might see for maybe not Amazon, but certainly for a kind of expert. You see the kind of as seen on these types of things, and you're connected one-on-one. Who doesn't want one-on-one IT help support when you're trying to figure out something of how to set something up? So it's probably hard to see how this is going to turn into victim-assisted fraud yet. It just looks like a scheme to maybe reroute people who are trying to buy something. Maybe you're trying to sell them something else. Actually, what we found is that, hey, I want to set up Amazon Prime, and then, hey, what's the phone number? Okay, is there anything to know? They call. You end up social engineering someone into the situation where you say, hey, there's actually an issue with your Prime account. And what we need you to do is we need you to buy a gift card or connect with your PayPal account or to utilize an account that you already have with stored value and provide that to unlock or to pay back some amount of money that is owed. And so while you're in this process of trying to create a support engagement, you say, oh, it looks like your account is locked because you're $5 overdue. Can you send us a gift card for that, et cetera, et cetera. These scale up based on the amount of funds that are available and based on kind of how much the people are willing to engage in that process. And then once you have kind of this, you can kind of see that people have this type of behavior more often and more often. And it's really quite sad when we see a lot of these pieces of information, because not only does it affect the actual victim whose payments are being stolen, but also in many cases, sometimes the experts are kind of duped into providing this type of service. They might not even know that they're being able to they're being able to do this. So in some of our other Crimes and Cocktails series, we talked about people who were duped into being secret shoppers, right? And like, hey, like use this money to go and buy this thing from this other place. It's really quite intriguing to see that these fraud rings are setting up basically triangulation schemes where the person with the payment is being convinced by someone who actually thinks they might be helping. And so they're all being orchestrated by this third party in this kind of scheme. And then those gift cards are then going on to be monetized by the organizing party. And so it's really quite sad. One of the things that I find that is super intriguing, one of the biggest elements that we saw that was the most indicative of this type of fraud was how long the user spent on the checkout page. And so a normal user who's going through and buying a gift card, they know what they want, they put it in there, they go through, they might finish their transaction in 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 20 seconds. The average cart time for this was 5 minutes. And so for me, like kind of thinking about a user who's trying to understand what's going on, trying to fix a problem that maybe was fabricated by this third party, to unlock their Amazon, Prime account. And then they're spending 5 minutes on a web page trying to understand how this is connected and still going through this with a transaction. I think this is just a fascinating social engineering case study of how saving, protecting an account doesn't do it in today's world. You have to really look at it holistically to really understand, is it usual for someone to spend 5 minutes clicking through and kind of adding information and taking information out? Or is that weird? Is that a sign that somebody might need help? I think that's a really interesting question. And maybe as retailers, we don't think about it that often, but it's, kind of think about somebody walking up into a store and there's this mysterious third party standing behind them. You don't really like see where that person's hands are. You would hope that the cashier at a physical store would have the good sense to say, hey, are you okay? How would we make that safe? That's a little bit of like what's happening here in the online checkout experience. All right. All right. And then there's some question about antivirus. Yes, I do. I do think that antivirus in general is probably not a strong signal from that perspective. And for your loved ones, maybe suggest not going that route. All right, Eleanor, I think it's time for you to take back over.
Perfect. Yes. So we've been a little doom and gloomy in all these stories. It's always, interesting to talk about and listen to, but I think the next thing we always care about is the so what. So as we're kind of wrapping this up, these are three fairly easy things we would recommend all of our merchants do to tackle account takeover. So first things first, at your network level, you need to have protection there to prevent against some of that bot traffic that's coming in. So these are the fraudsters who are using bots to high volume, credential stuff, brute force, things like that. By introducing that network level protection, that goes away. All that malicious traffic goes away. If you also have DDoS attacks, this would help with that as well. So that's pretty baseline. We recommend that. The next thing you might want to consider is adding in two-factor authentication as you're thinking about login attempts, certainly, but also maybe risky account modification activities. Maybe those also need to be validated via two-factor. And then kind of as we've been talking about this entire time through all these stories, ATO is not a point problem and it can't be addressed with point solutions. We need to think about what we can do across the entire customer journey. How do we want to think about ATO at login, at account edit, at checkout, et cetera? So just to kind of highlight what that would look like across the customer journey, there's a lot of ways to address this, and it's important to balance some of these best practices with what your own account strategy is as a business, because accounts are obviously very valuable to use. So let's talk about this example. Maybe we let anybody make an account. Maybe that's something we don't necessarily care about. We say, that's fine. That being said, let's now maybe think about what we want to do at login. And we say, okay, great. Like we're going to introduce two-factor authentication at login. That's super awesome. But by doing that, you might be putting in too much friction for your good customers. I know how annoying it is to be asked for my two-factor authentication every single time I come to some of these websites where I shop a lot. So that's where we maybe need to be a little bit more strategic about thinking when to deploy the challenge and when to ask for those codes for things like that. Account update is interesting too. This is where you really want to be listening to what's going on. You might ironically not want to tell fraudsters that you're on to them at this point, because like we talked about earlier, that's giving away the information for free. So let's listen to this here maybe. And then we use all of that information at checkout where the financial impact is happening to stop all that information. So ATO solutions are really all around right sizing the friction at the right time in the customer journey so that conversion can continue to be optimized instead of putting in more friction and turning away those good customers. And I know we're getting close on time, so I think I will pass it back to Bennett for our little wrap-ups here.
Yeah, absolutely. So hopefully you found this interesting. We obviously packed this into about 50 minutes, got some polls, got some questions, hopefully some interesting stories and some tidbits about how the holiday season has been going across e-commerce generally. If you're interested in more types of stories about fraud and fraud attempts or social engineering or fraud rings that have CS style structure with call centers and crazy kind of stories like that, kind of who is the enemy, right? For all of us that we're trying to make sure we stop. The State of Fraud is out and is a fascinating read. You can absolutely access that. And then we have a live holiday pulse tracker for the rest. We still have, call it 9 to 12 days of shopping left. And so, definitely keep track of that live. If you are interested in a Signifyd team member taking you through your own data, through data that's relevant to your industry, please do reach out and your account team will be able to do that. So as a way to see that, you can definitely just say yes if you're interested, and someone from the Signifyd team will be reaching out. If you're an existing client, we'll contact you via that, or if you're interested in learning more, then we can do that. I think we've answered all the questions. There was a kind of question about the gifts, which is the kind of mocktail and kind of piece from that. And so if you are interested in this, please sign up. To the person who had a question about the kit, I will make sure that the team reaches out to you with an answer to that question. But really appreciate your all's engagement on the polls. Always love the contrarians who say, no, I've never seen a phishing attempt for me, my friend, or my family. I would love to chat with you and see kind of what your experience is. Hope everyone has an excellent rest of their December.